All right, for more, we are joined by Rod Campbell. He's a research director at Australia Institute. Rod, thank you so much for joining us. So some experts say that Australia's gun system is strict on paper, but lax in practice. I mean, does the latest attack prove that point? And where exactly did the system fail?
So I think what's important to understand is that Australia now has more guns now than it did after our big gun law reforms in the late 1990s. Before the terrible Port Arthur massacre in 1996, there were about 3 million guns in Australia. Now there's over 4 million guns in Australia. That number did drop down to about 2.5 million through the late 90s. But in the last decade, we've steadily seen gun numbers increase in Australia. And so I think Australian governments, federal and state, because there's some different responsibilities and jurisdictions, but I think all Australian governments have been complacent about gun laws in Australia, and it's time to strengthen them again.
So it was strictly down to complacency, because I think your institute, maybe it was you yourself, pointed out that this agreement, which was signed nearly 30 years ago, was actually reconfirmed in 2017. I mean, is there more to why there was a sense of complacency? Was it, successive governments who were distracted? What exactly led to this complacency?
Yeah, I think Australia's gun law reforms in the late 1990s were very successful. We reduced the number of guns in Australia substantially. Since then, there hasn't been such a terrible mass shooting incident as we've seen this week. And I think governments had other priorities. And you're right, the National Firearms Agreement that was committed to nearly 30 years ago, recommitted to in 2017, it's actually never been completed. There is still no national register of firearms in Australia. If you want to know how many firearms are in your state or maybe in your neighbourhood, if you're looking to move to a part of Australia that you're trying to avoid living near lots of gun owners, that data is just simply not available to you in most of the country. So, there's a lot of unfinished business, and hopefully that can now be pushed ahead.
So I want to ask you in particular, Rod, about this movement which you just mentioned. I'm referring more to the movement of people and the inconsistent application of gun laws. So can you dumb it down for us? How does this inconsistent application result in, for example, that ban for under 18s being flouted? Is it as simple as someone under 18 buying a gun in one state where they're not so strict and then just moving to another state, and there you have another gun now in a state where there isn't supposed to be a gun for someone below 18?
Yeah, so each state has its own gun laws. For example, Western Australia has recently put a cap on gun ownership and put extra. So I guess one big problem that we've seen is that while gun numbers have remained reasonably, only increased, by 25%, the number of guns per licence has increased. So there's been moves towards capping the number of guns that an individual owner can have. That's something Western Australia has done, and now there's pushes for that to happen elsewhere. But you're absolutely right. Australia's state borders are completely porous. Anyone can go across any border at any time. And so that lack of consistency in our gun laws is part of the problem, I think.
So, Rod, the government now says it will toughen gun laws with tighter licensing and limits on the number of types of guns individuals can own. So would these measures be meaningful, improve public safety? Are these measures enough?
Yeah, I mean, what the response to the Port Arthur massacre in 1996 showed is that Australia does know what to do to improve community safety. We do know how to reduce the number of guns in Australia with targeted buybacks to reduce the number of particularly lethal guns that are in people's hands. We do know how to implement strong storage provisions. A related problem, not related to this incident, but recent Australia Institute research has shown that over 2,000 guns get stolen each year. 2,000 legally owned guns get stolen and end up in the hands of criminals each year. That's a gun every 4 hours. So cracking down on storage provisions is important, and reducing the number of guns overall is not only important for safety, but it's important to note that it's got the overwhelming backing of the Australian public. Even before this incident, 85% of Australians are in favour of stronger gun laws.
So the New South Wales Premier Chris Minns, was just talking about this, saying that unless you're a farmer or you work in agriculture, you don't need these massive weapons. So are you saying that Australians in general will be okay, are sympathetic to this particular rationale, including a particular group, the hunting community as well, which our correspondent brought up earlier?
Look, Australians overwhelmingly support stronger gun laws. Australians overwhelmingly want fewer guns in the community. This has been consistent over time. Australians are proud of our gun laws. Your correspondent, if I may point, was actually wrong to say that the National Party defends the right of regional Australians to have guns. There is no right to have a gun in Australia. Owning a gun in Australia is a privilege, not a right, and that's the underlying basis of all of our gun laws. So, no, there is no widespread pushback against this. The support for reducing the number of guns in Australia is absolutely overwhelming. All it needs is government effort and commitment to just get it done.
And Rod, just very quickly, what about this idea of collective punishment? Because officials talking about the additional use of criminal intelligence. And one aspect of this is that, license renewal is subject to, I guess, review based on a person's suspicious activity, and that, if suspicious, could disqualify all members from owning a gun?
Oh, look, as I just said, having a gun in Australia is a privilege, not a right. Nobody should assume or demand that they should own a gun no matter what. Australians want fewer guns. Fewer guns leads to a safer community. This terrible incident this week is not isolated. Earlier this year, we saw 2 police shot dead in Victoria. We saw a random shooting incident in Sydney where somebody fired off 60 rounds and fortunately no one was killed. Gun violence is a problem in Australia, and the Australian community overwhelmingly wants to do something about it, and that is have fewer guns and tighter gun laws.
Okay. All right. Understood, Rod. Thank you so much for your insight this morning. Rod Campbell, Research Director at Australia Institute.